start this off with some good comments because I don't want this all to be bad. So I will thank Malele Coggs and the Common Council for passing the George Floyd resolution. I think that's another good step, but this is partially why I'm doing this press conference and why other groups and comrades of mine, TPR and others, will be speaking out today on some of these bills, because we feel like a lot of these have been undermining to some of the progress that we've had locally, which is, again, why we are here today. So this is why this is entitled Not Our Bills. It has been 1 year since George Floyd uttered the words that moved cities, states, and nations to take to the streets for justice, and almost 365 days since I rallied the citizens and residents across Wisconsin to converge on 27th and Center to stand in solidarity with Minnesota and the Floyd family, but also to bring our attention and action back towards our own George Floyd's here in Milwaukee. Recently, the question has been asked of us in reflection of this year that has passed: where are we now? Well, I still feel choked out. We still can't breathe. We still face a city that is poverty-stricken, a city of traumatized, most mass incarcerated, least invested in, worse for this and that. Almost 365 days ago, I implored, before we set a foot in these streets, to start with a list of demands, which we did. And once those boots hit the ground, I implored they look to the past footprints and take the blueprint with them of those who participated in the longest consecutive days of protests, of those who preceded us in the movements of past. And that goal has also been well surpassed, amazingly. But those folks, past and present, have taken more steps toward justice than those who don't have to take one step, but simply a stroke of a pen, and sadly they refuse to do so. In a nation we claim as so fair, equal, welcoming, superior, and just, why is there such a need to convince folks to let us breathe? In a city and state where folks can claim to be pro-life, yet protest mask mandates and against health regulations aimed at saving lives, those folks under every story of crime and loss of life in communities they don't live in, calling for more murder, eradication, and trauma. They would rather police be able to use knees rather than humanity and common sense, but scoff at those folks saying they can't breathe. We have a former police chief complaining and whining about injustice out of pride, but where was that concern in the process when he himself forced out 7 or so officers without cause or just process, in which he himself is being sued for? Police won't even let police breathe here. I've aforementioned numerous ways and reasons for why our breath in Milwaukee is scarce, much of which are leadership and system culture problems. But let me tell you more reasons. Assembly Bill 108, an attempt to make verbal threats to officers felonies. To say, I'll beat your so-and-so and such can land you a felony, based on a premise that a verbal threat can typically lead to action. Interesting, especially when citizens have endured threats of arrest, bodily harm, and even death in the most minor of exchanges. We've seen countless innocent people be held at gunpoint without having committed any crime at all. Yet there's no reprimand or protection in place for those folks, some even being children. We still don't have a bill that offers a balance of protection, let alone a concern for the larger issue of violence against people in this state at the hands of law enforcement, something we know to be an issue due to the tens, even hundreds of millions in tax dollars wasted on lawsuits and settlements for folks who have had worse than verbal threats done to them. Assembly Bill 109, creation of a database to gather use of force data from departments statewide, and pushes the DOJ to create an annual report on uses of force. But then what? One of those demands from 365 days ago were that we actually do something about the action and the data. If found unlawful and criminal, putting a system in place that will automatically mandate officers to get psych evals, trainings, and reviews of their employment when they get too many of a certain type of complaint or after high-profile uses of force incidents. Had this been listened to, we wouldn't have issues like TOSA hiring folks who don't have the credentials, expertise, or unbiased interests of citizens to stand in as counselors, acting as psychiatrists and psychologists, clearing officers for duty off opinions. The chief has even elected to not even create a fit for duty policy on top of this, which creates a web of liability and danger for its citizens. That is a neglect not only for the residents, but the officers themselves. Or how about a bill that incentivizes departments who focus on de-escalation and lowering use of force incidents? Nobody thought of that. Nobody could agree between the parties on that. Assembly Bill 134. In a nation where most agencies and departments agree that they don't even train officers in chokeholds, why is there a discussion about still keeping a just-in-case clause? You cannot name one incident where a chokehold was necessary to save an officer's life. Not one. Why are we advocating for using tactics that aren't even part of use of force trainings anyway? In that case, let's throw some kick flips, bicycle kicks, neck chops, and judo flips in too. Just in case. While you search for that one name in one instance I asked for, I'll give you two names: Joel Acevedo and Corey Stingley. One law enforcement related death and one where 3 white citizens choked a 16-year-old to death for attempting to leave the store after leaving behind some wine coolers he attempted to steal. Those 3 citizens faced no charges. Didn't work for the store, didn't know Corey, had zero right to take his life. This former officer Mattioli threw a party during the initial parts of the pandemic here in Milwaukee and choked Joel to death for much longer than George Floyd had a knee on his neck. But we want to give law enforcement all the tools they need to do their job safely, right? If they say they are people same as us doing a job, then treat them equally under the law. Stop playing politics with the lives of everyday people under the banner of loyalty or support to law enforcement. Your loyalty and support should be just as such for those who will end up in situations like the 2 names I just mentioned. Ban all chokeholds, do not half-ass the people. Are there any bills we support? Absolutely. We support any bill that promotes good mental health standards, accountability, and community-driven cultures in these departments. So I will stand with my fellow comrades of the People's Revolution who will be in Madison today, supporting Bill 331, 332, the Crisis Training Bill, 333, Crisis Program Enhancement Grants, 334, and Assembly Bill 335. We support the database bill. However, it is a percent of a shadow of what's needed and necessary and what would and could be impactful. We also support the Protections for Whistleblowers bill. There needs to be a bill that backs policies like the duty to intervene policy, which specifically exists in Milwaukee but has not been enforced, nor have folks been reprimanded for ignoring that policy. Law enforcement calls for citizens to see something, say something, but we see a clear culture of no snitching in policing. Officers need protections from being targeted after whistleblowing. Absolutely. The Assembly bill relating to and concerning state interference, which in my opinion is what it is, yielding to the police union, which is not unbiased, giving them a platform and voice on a board that is supposed to be one of accountability and a community oversight board. That's unacceptable. How can we build trust by giving the very folks who have supported and backed officers who have done wrong to put folks in place that will have the interest of the people in the community over that of the department and individual officers, let alone the attempt to explain placing police and fire folks on a fire and police commission as checks and balances for other fire and police employees is laughable and ridiculous. That is not what the community needs. That is not what the community wants. And even constituents of Senator Taylor, who I support on most everything else, who supports and pushes this bill and other bills, have echoed this is not something they support. The past 365 days of action cannot be done in vain by letting folks who have no skin in the game, particularly the Republican Party, lead these conversations on justice and equality. The Republican Party and the police unions are too close politically, and although Senator Weingart claims this shouldn't be about race or politics, this bill shows that it is exactly still about both. These powers should remain with the commission, but should be extended to the Common Council and not be influenced or threatened by the state attempting to assert more powers for police or the union to place their own folks on the commission. I don't believe the reason Senator Taylor gave to be adequate to support this dangerous bill. I do, however, agree that the power and control for placement on the board should not solely be in the mayor's hands, or at least not the current mayor. The assembly bill related to cop houses, more ridiculousness. More police does not equal less crime. Not to mention the Republican Party continues to ignore and not address the legitimate trust issues and culture folks have with law enforcement, which in Milwaukee will make more issues arise rather than fix the issues. Milwaukee is already complaining on thinning numbers they currently have to respond and address issues adequately. So their answer is to send more officers off into neighborhoods by themselves, making less officers available to respond to high priority incidents. Senator Weingart needs to be checked and understand that Racine is not Milwaukee. We do need resource houses in Milwaukee, but they should not be focused nor dependent on being ran or led by police or law enforcement. In Milwaukee, we have community groups who need support and should be given these houses instead, if anything. This has been asked for at least all of the years I've been a community activist. The house I currently reside in has been used as a resource house out of the Sherman Park area, out of which we have supported and organized community efforts to combat crime and other ills led by residents, leaders, and organizations. Milwaukee has been very clear that we want investment in non-police response and programs that are more community oriented and investment in non-police response programs. This bill is a direct opposite of what has clearly been called for, which is a consistent occurrence with this party, which is what will continue to make their input void. Assembly Bill 329. We do not need a bill for data or reporting of no-knock warrants. We need a ban on them. Specifically, we need State Rep. Lakeisha Myers' bill to pass. Wisconsin historically was the first state to authorize these types of warrants. So we should be just as historically intentional on ending them. Might I even suggest, while you gather your data, let's see who these warrants are most used on. I can guarantee in Charles Barkley's voice, we will find it lopsided. These legislators have had more than enough time to research other states who are following this trend and appearing as if they haven't done research, and that being the basis of why they won't move on it. I'll name two names for them: Breonna Taylor and Aiyana Jones, a 7-year-old child killed by Detroit police as she slept on a couch in 2010 during a raid on a wrong address. Or maybe one they'll care about. Here in South Milwaukee, an officer died after being shot during one. State Rep. Lakeisha Myers drafted the Breonna bill, which I believe to be one of the sole reasons folks on the other side won't support. But maybe that tone will change when the officer's name is at the center of the conversation, since their support seems to be based around a certain job title. I thought all lives mattered. Let's not forget the Wisconsin Professional Police Association Executive Director Jim Palmer supported ending the use of these warrants, as he himself says they are dangerous for police and people alike, which speak volumes when we can actually agree on something with the police union. Assembly Bill 330, as it relates to school resource officers. We do not want nor need them here in Milwaukee. I believe this will be yet another attempt to undermine progress made in Black communities, where it has been found that placing officers in schools do not make them safer, but lead to young people's truancy, amassing tickets and arrests for things that would typically be a suspension, and feeding a school to prison pipeline issue. Stop forcing law enforcement into every aspect of life. This is not the best option. Organizations who address social ills in schools so teachers don't have to, violence prevention efforts, etc. need to be supported. Community answers for community issues. I do not understand why so many white males in the Republican Party find it so necessary to chime in on issues in communities they do not live in. Why are folks allowed to make bills directed at the majority communities of color? Why are these folks so entitled and encompassed in saviorism to think that they have all the answers for people of color and our issues while ignoring what we know and say we need? A bill needs to be drafted that prevents interference and blocking by these people in the affairs that affect residents of another elected district. No bill that supports or protects folks in these communities are being drafted. But these one-sided opposition styles deliberately undermining bills aimed at one specific community should be considered attacks. Most of these bills have not been brought to the residents here, voted on, or any opportunity given for input, yet folks just think up these ridiculous bills, fill their ballpoint pens with ignorance, and stroke away at pieces of paper and say, "Take that, Milwaukee." Vanguard somehow thinks these bills equally cover and protect all people. The laws being applied equally is how he put it, but I don't see equality anywhere. Lastly, the issue of former department head Morales. I want to make this adamantly clear. We do not support nor want that ridiculousness of a chief back on the job here. Placing him back in a position as chief of this department will undo the huge steps towards transparency and rebuilding trust that has happened since the divine moment he was demoted, followed by his abrupt emotional retirement and waddling off into the abyss. I do not care what that judge says. The city already pays out millions of dollars in lawsuits. One more won't hurt. Give that man his coins, and if it were me, that's exactly what I'd pay him in, all change, and tell him to continue his hike. This city went through a plethora of issues and drama with him leading the department. Hell, the department went through a plethora of issues under his work leadership, including an intentional leak of sensitive information, files, etc., that put potential victims in danger, which he refused to address or accept responsibility to, let alone prioritize looking into to ensure safety of folks they are supposed to serve and protect. He used his title and position to carry out vendettas on whoever he caught a small man complex with, including myself, refusing to work with even the city's Office of Violence Prevention, and even to the point of ignoring inquiries and attempts to collaborate by a number of aldermen and women. That is not leadership. We have a process of the chief selection that has been destroyed behind him, and I attest that candidate left in the process and the current standing chief, Jeffrey Norman, are far better choices than Morales. And with that, I'll end my comments and open up for questions.
One thing the state did not come to an agreement on is defining use of force. My understanding is Fire and Police Commission might take up putting together language for Milwaukee. What are your thoughts on defining use of force?
Absolutely needs to be done. This is why it's very important the laws that the state does draft, because they can affect the ability of the Fire and Police Commission to make the correct terminology for that. With them attempting to put people in place, especially people who have some type of attachment to law enforcement, that can alter what comes out in the Fire and Police Commission as far as what goes on paper. And we can't have people who are biased making up those standard operating procedures. It's just a conflict of interest.
And you talked about paying out former Chief Morales. Is that something that you're hoping the city attorney will do then and come to an agreement?
I implore them to. We do not want him back as chief. We do not need him back as chief. Jeffrey Norman is doing a hell of a job. Even the candidate that's left in the chief selection will do wonders better than Morales did. Right now, we're on the way towards some good progress with the department, and we don't want to interrupt that.
This task force in Madison, they met 8 times, 6 times in Madison. They went to Green Bay, they went to Kenosha, but this is a racial disparity task force, something that is focusing on the issues that face communities of color, specifically African Americans. What does it say to you that they didn't come to Milwaukee?
It says everything that the email between him and Steinke says. That task force, and a bit of history, that task force came about because Orlando Owens was running for office, and he asked me what could the Republican Party do, and him and specifically along with the Republican Party, to gain the trust and votes of people in Milwaukee. And I told him that with these list of demands that are being put out, and with the coming, at the time, we were trying to get them to make a special session, that we need to know what the Republican stance would be on these demands we were making. He brought Voss to the table. We had an online public discussion, and that's where the task force came from. I didn't end up on that task force. I was ousted from that task force, but it came from a conversation that me and Orlando Owens sparked. And that tells you again about the genuineness of the task force to begin with. My reservation with all of this stuff is we came with a list of demands. Not only my organization that started it off, that's continued to put forth lists of demands, but others as well. Most of those demands are not even on the table, are not being spoken about, and not taken seriously. That is a problem.
14 members on that law enforcement specific part of the task force. 5 of them are from Milwaukee. I mean, that's over a third of these members that are from Milwaukee. Do you feel like Milwaukee's voice is represented in this task force?
We all know that it makes a difference who's in the room. And again, it makes a difference who's not in the room. There are people that are on that task force that have never taken these issues on, that don't have an unbiased or balanced outlook on these issues, versus people who have taken these issues on for most of their career, or on a day-to-day basis for not only the past year, but years before this. Why are the people who are on that task force versus the people who are not? Again, it calls to the legitimacy of what is going on there. There may be 5 people from Milwaukee, but if we were to say, speak those names, then people can come up with what they come with from those names.
Yeah, one more question too about, not coming to Milwaukee. Not having them come to the blackest city in the country, or in the state, I'm sorry. And these are supposed to be bills that are designed to help the black community. I mean, can these bills be legitimate in your eyes, a black man?
Absolutely not. Most of these bills are, even the ones that we support, still need some alterations, still need to be edited to be even partially effective. And again, a lot of these issues, it's funny that a lot of these issues that they are taking up on our behalf, any other point, they are totally against them, and still continue to draft legislation aimed at this particular community. Even to the effect of trying to defund Milwaukee if we defund the police, but we're asking for our money, our actual tax dollars that we pay, which Milwaukee pays more out to the state than anywhere else. It's a driving force economically for the entire state. They won't allow the people to say what we want done with the money. And we are saying we do not need more police. It's not working. We need more alternatives. We need more front-end support and education and other things that will solve the crime issue. But they have been working even in the middle of this against those things. So
Thank you. Any other questions?
thank you.
Thank you so much for waiting
Thanks,
for me.
man.
No
Appreciate it.
problem.
Thank you.